Pokemon is the biggest franchise in the world, a fact that GameFreak and Nintendo seem to pretty often forget. There are so many Pokemon to choose from, to love, to raise to their fullest potential, and they're ever expanding. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was a breath of fresh air for some fans and a laughingstock for others, with glitches, issues, and bugs, and not the Pokemon kind, running rampant throughout. There were some redeeming qualities to the games too. A full open world map, a semi-non-linear story where you could go where you want, when you want, options for which parts of the story to do when, and one of my favorite post-game stories as the grape or orange on top of this sundae, depending on your version, of course. It's getting close to a year since these games launched, and now that the first DLC expansion is out for Scarlet and Violet, was it enough to overcome the issues of the base games? Some things are fixed, some things are expanded, and some things never change with Pokemon games. Let's dive in straight from the rim of the Great Crater in the Teal Mask's loot. The Pokemon themselves must always take center stage when talking about this franchise, and there's a lot to like here. It's not the end-all be-all everyone is here that many fans are still begging for after 2 generations on the Switch, but it steps in the right direction. Outside of game, this makes sense. Not every Pokemon is available in every region. Why should that be different moving forward? But Game Freak shot themselves in the foot with the first National Dex, and it only got worse when Gen 8 rolled around. There have been many strides with Pokemon Home, its integration with all the games and the ability to hold Pokemon, but some just want to battle with their favorites, and some of them are still not here. The Teal Mask has helped with some of these. Some Pokemon having their first debut on the Switch versions of Pokemon games with this DLC, with 99 returning Pokemon coming in with this update. Some that I really like to see were the ones introduced in Pokemon Legends Arceus, like Hisuian Growlithe, Hisuian Arcanine, and Ursaluna, with the latter getting a special version in this game through one of the stories. Any Pokemon game or DLC at this point wouldn't feel right without new Pokemon as well. We got a few this time with Sinistcha, Poltergeist, and Dipplin, all divergent species, with a more Japanese style from the Gen 8 versions they came from. With those covered, there's only one more thing to talk about that any Pokemon game needs: Legends. And there are a handful of new ones in the Teal Mask, namely Okidogi, Munkidori, and Pheasantipiti, collectively known as the Loyal 3, along with the masked Pokemon itself, Ogerpon. The Loyal 3 all share a poison typing with different dual type attached, Psychic, Fighting, and Fairy respectively, that layer in with the poison typing to make things like their fights and story pretty entertaining and even be a bit challenging. Ogerpon, while feeling a bit new and different, also feels like a gimmick that Pokemon keeps bringing back, the Type Switch Pokemon. Starting with Arceus and moving to Gen 7 Silvally, the creators of Pokemon keep toying with this idea of a Pokemon that changes type based on an item it carries. Ogerpon is very much the same, though instead of completely changing its typing, it adds the type of its mask to its base grass type, and it has 3 options to choose from, as opposed to the 18 that Arceus and Silvally command. The overall grouping here and typing of the legendaries stand on shaky ground with me, but many legends in the last few games have as well. These all seem more like endangered species that are fairly just run-of-the-mill Pokemon than legends, but because there's only one, it's a big deal. Game Freak has been running themselves into this issue fairly repeatedly since Generation 1, and the legends just don't hold the charm that they used to in my opinion. The battles were still fun, and the Pokemon are interesting, but legend is a strong word for how these feel. With the gameplay, it's still Scarlet and Violet. There isn't a whole lot new, but just more of it. And that's kind of the point of a DLC. Giving the fans more of what they want and helping to fix any issues in gameplay is the whole point of adding more. Unless you're greedy, then it's just money. Is it wrong to assume that Game Freak is doing a bit of both here? No, but this does feel like a much bigger expansion in terms of world size than Generation 8's DLC did. More to explore, more hidden places, things you can easily miss and accidentally never see. On top of that, there are some new instances for Titan-style fights that feel really good and fun to do throughout the story, and side story, and new minigame called Ogre Oustin that give rewards to players for better scores, and it isn't absolutely awful to play. It is still a minigame in a Pokemon game though, so your mileage may vary. One nice thing that has been seemingly fixed from the base game is the boxes for your Pokemon, and their visuals. The boxes in Scarlet and Violet were troublesome, not loading correctly and taking forever to show what Pokemon were even in them. Now they seem much more snappy and together. In fact, all of the menu systems feel better than they did in the base game, and it's a welcome change to overall gameplay that players will hopefully notice. I have a lot of nice things to say about the zones in this DLC, but there's one thing that's very obvious. Game Freak loves putting mountains in the middle of a giant map. Looking at the map of Kitakami, it is pretty large in comparison to other DLCs, but the map is kind of just a smaller version of the Paldea map. Giant geographical big deal in the middle of the map, full of crystals, with the surrounding areas being about the regular life people and Pokemon have in their regular days. This isn't a bad thing, but looking back on the maps of other Pokemon games, you start to see a trend take place, especially with all the time we spent in Sinnoh and Hisui in the last few years, and their maps being very similarly influenced. I guess it makes sense that we have a handful of Hisui Pokemon popping up in Kitakami. It feels and looks like home to them. The big mountain in question is Oni Mountain. Made up of a few smaller zones and a couple of large cave systems, Oni Mountain holds the most real estate in the Kitakami region, and it has a good amount of story significance to go along with it. Is it the best example of big mountain, many legends, super important in a Pokemon game? No. Is it more than passable and even interesting? A solid yes. The shape and style, looking like a giant Pokemon all on its own, seems to take a page from some other Titan-like games on the Switch in recent years, but feels very Pokemon, and also way more real than other titles. If Pokemon is good at one thing, it's the history and feel of the world that they build. On top of the mountain is a large pool full of, well, water, obviously, but more importantly, crystals. If you couldn't tell by the music playing or the obnoxious amount of Glimmet and Glamora floating around, these crystals are the same as the ones in Area Zero, and what they lead to and mean throughout the story adds more fuel to the Area Zero is a big deal fire. The last zone I want to talk about, though not the last zone in the expansion, is the Timeless Woods. There are a lot of interesting qualities about this zone. From Pokemon you can find to story and quest points that end up here, the zone feels almost on its own level at times. Like it was dragged out of another Pokemon game, and everyone knows it feels odd. It felt to me, based on the Pokemon and what happens there, that it's a forgotten piece of Hisui that has lived on, though these two zones are not close enough to each other for that to be the case. It feels almost out of place compared to the other areas of the game, but it's not unwelcome. It's the most diverse area in the game comparatively and breaks up the bigger two story quests quite well. The Teal mask introduces a new world with its own interpretations of Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet's base game. Seemingly based in a Japanese-influenced area, somewhere near but not too close to Sinnoh or Hisui, the more rural area is home to many types of people and Pokemon, all with their own traditions and legends. The legend of the Loyal 3 and the Ogre being the main legend followed in this expansion. Game Freak has managed to tie it all into the base game as a whole, with the introduction to this area being a school trip, your chaperone being Heath's descendant, and many of the encounters using terrestrialization and Titan-style mechanics without just forcing them into the game with a shovel, even though geographically we are on the other side of the world. They even made that point obvious with day and night cycles being at opposite times in Kitakami and Paldea. The characters introduced in the Teal mask add on to the story of the base game in a stronger way than previous DLCs. Don't get me wrong, there were obvious connections to the main story in Sword and Shield as well, with parents and teachers of characters from the base game becoming the focal points of the expansion story. But this time around, the story itself also continues to open up, and new characters related to past games are also appearing, tying their lines into the future of Pokemon as well. Case in point, let's start with Briar. Briar is the descendant of Heath, the author of the Scarlet and Violet books, respectively, and the researcher behind the Terapagos and Area Zero explorations. If you couldn't tell by her outfit and earrings, she has a lot to do with the continuation of the story, the colors and style being a dead giveaway to her intentions. When we get to Kitakami, after a flight and a bus trip, we get introduced to the area and people through Kieran and Carmine, a brother and sister duo with some family squabbles and big personality differences lending to their characters. Carmine is strong-willed to say the least, quick to anger, and feels that they are always right and not to be defied. Her characterization giving her a cartoonish arrogance that honestly gets a bit old after a while. No real character development happens with Carmine besides having a new place to focus her anger about halfway through the story. Kieran, on the other hand, is a shy, quiet kid who, over time, we begin to see that family anger rise up in him as well. He wants to be the center of attention, and the player character just has too much plot armor for that to happen. He thinks the world is out to be against him at all times, and even though he grows and changes and gets stronger all the time throughout the story, he just can't catch a break or get what he wants. The Loyal 3 are also a key part in this story. As your class trip unfolds, you hear the story of the Loyal 3 banding together to defeat the Ogre of Oni Mountain and protect the village. About 30% into the expansion, you find out the truth, and the Loyal 3 are given a very different lens than how they are seen at the beginning of the game. Ogerpon is the last key to the main story puzzle. The Ogre of Oni Mountain is more of a Kung Fu style legend, shy but strong. has been hurt by people in the past and has very little trust to start out with, but becomes friends with your little group quickly, especially after the truth of their ancient myth comes out. They end up trusting the player character and moving forward to grow and become close to them, much to the ire of some of the other characters around. Many points of the story feel like the start of a villain arc for one character in particular, and the future holds much, it seems, for the ones we meet here. Many of the characters at the end of the story vow to see you again, and as Briar, Carmine, and Kieran are all from the Unovan Blueberry Academy, and the next DLC is going to be taking place there, you can bet the continuation of the story will happen, and we will absolutely be seeing these people again. The side story in the Teal Mask takes a lot of credit from one particular Pokemon game. Starting off by introducing yourself to a photographer in the southwest corner of Matsui Town, they tell you that you need to complete 150 Pokemon captured in the Kitakami decks, and they'll be more willing to talk to you. If you completed the decks in the base game, 100 of the Pokemon in the Kitakami decks will already be completed, so the challenge is a lot less for the completionists who caught them all. The photographer you're speaking to is Perrin, a descendant of Adaman from the Legends Arceus game based in the Hisui region, a historical version of the Sinnoh region from Gen 4. Perrin is a traveling photographer in the middle of an existential crisis. Her work and photos just aren't speaking to her anymore. The accolades and awards have all dried up, and she's looking to get back to the highs of her career. She's on the hunt for a specific Pokemon that's rumored to be in Kitakami. In fact, she has some historical connection to this specific Pokemon. The Blood Moon Beast is a very particular Ursaluna that is said to have come from Sinnoh or Hisui a long time ago to Kitakami and is living somewhere in the area. With her trusted Hisui and Growlithe, she is on the hunt to get photos of the Blood Moon Beast to reignite her passion for her art and hopefully get back to the peak of her abilities again. This quest requires some very different mechanics for a Pokemon game, but not too different from a certain spin-off many are familiar with. The idea is to narrow down the Pokemon in the area by taking photos, a la Pokemon Snap, to find the Blood Moon Beast and get photos of it. Succeeding in this quest, Perrin is thrilled with the results and gives you a Hisui and Growlithe of your very own, but states that they usually grow in pairs, so she expects to see you again soon. Maybe at Blueberry Academy? We'll have to wait a little bit longer to find out. The issues with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were well covered during their release. Many people pointed out a lot of the problems. Much like those issues, this is still an expansion of the same game, and there are plenty of the same issues here as well. It is still Scarlet and Violet after all. From textures loading oddly to not loading at all, many rendering issues and pop-ins, and of course, frame rate issues. The games did get better, but not groundbreakingly so. The boxes, as I mentioned before, still feel a lot better, but it's not where it should be, and I think that goes for the rest of the game as well. There are improvements, but it still isn't perfect or even amazing by any stretch of the imagination. There are many still upset about the national decks and not being able to truly catch them all in every game. And while I personally believe that regional variation in limited numbers is a good thing in each generation, I definitely understand the frustrations here with all of us being told since 1996 to catch them all and blatantly not being able to do so. One of the biggest issues for me personally was the fact that we have better scaling in this DLC than in base game or Sword and Shield and their DLCs, but the battles that should be fun scaled up are still kind of a joke. Pokemon in the wild can be found up to pretty high levels, the highest I saw being in the high 70s or low 80s. But the battles you have during the story, while scaled up to your level, aren't challenging or exciting. They're just leveled up. One of the first battles you do is with Carmine, and she brings a scaled up team. Cool, but they're all stage 1 Pokemon with basic moves that made me laugh as all the battles until the last few felt like jokes. If a team is going to go through all the work of scaling these Pokemon and their levels, why not their forms and evolutions? If you want to go in with a full stack of level 100s on your team and playing this DLC after the base game, it should feel like the next step. If you want to go in with a fresh team and you're just partway through your time in Paldea, that's fine. But to be this open and almost one-sided was a complaint that I had with Isle of Armor's DLC as well for Sword and Shield. You get Kubfu at a low level and basically have to leave and play the game with him from scratch instead of being able to continue in the DLC. It's annoying to have so many potential successes that just don't cross the finish line. Honestly, the game didn't feel like a waste of time, and I had a lot of fun with it overall. I enjoyed my time in Scarlet and Violet and enjoyed my time in the Teal Mask as well. That being said, it was purely more of the same for this expansion, which is kind of what Pokemon is. It's new story, but the overall mechanics haven't changed from the roots of the games in Red and Blue, and I don't think that a DLC pack would be the one to do it. Would I have liked some bug fixes and some additional optimization of the games overall? Absolutely. Do I think that the game is completely unplayable and needs to be fixed? Yes and no. It needs work still. But I don't expect that to happen. With as many hints to Legends Arceus as we have received in this game, my hope is that they have finally heard the fans and are working on another Legends-style game to give them some additional time to refine and grow the roots that they started in Scarlet and Violet. This game has a great foundation. It's just everything else on top that needs to be worked on.